The wind was a blade, and Jesse Creel was riding straight into it. Snow did not fall. It flew sideways, stinging his face like buckshot, erasing the world until there was nothing but white fury and the failing surge of the horse beneath him. He was losing the canyon, losing the trail, losing the blood from his shoulder. The cold was a mercy at first. It turned the fire in his upper back to a dull, heavy ache. But now the numbness was in his fingers, and his gloved hand was frozen tight to the reins. His left arm, the wounded one, was just dead weight, sticky and hot inside his wool coat. He could feel the blood, frozen stiff against the fabric. He risked a look back. Nothing. He had seen nothing for an hour, but that meant less than zero. They were back there. The posse from Three Forks was not the kind to give up a chase for bad weather. They were the kind that used the weather. The robbery had gone wrong from the start. A silent bank, a sleeping teller, and then the deputy. That fool kid, Micah, walking in for a morning coffee. Jesse had only fired after Micah drew. It was self-defense. But the dead deputy in the doorway and the saddlebags full of someone else's money told a different story. Then came the betrayal. His partner, Sykes, had taken the main bag and the only clear road, leaving Jesse with a bullet in his shoulder and a posse on his heels. His horse, a good bay mare, stumbled, catching herself on the ice-slicked rock. She was done. Her breath plumed in great, shuddering clouds. She could not go much farther, and neither could he. If the cold did not take him, the blood loss would. If the blood loss did not take him, the posse would. He was a dead man, just looking for a warmer place to lie down. Through the whiteout, a shape loomed. It was darker than the rock, too square to be adrift. Jesse squinted, wiping ice from his eyelashes. It was a structure, a ruin. He urged the mare forward, sliding down a short, treacherous bank until they stood before it. An old chapel. Maybe. The sign above the door was long gone, and half the roof was missing. Black bones of burnt timber reaching up at the gray sky. It looked like it had been torched years ago. It was shelter. Barely. He tried to swing his leg over the saddle, but his body refused. The frozen muscles locked. He fell, more than dismounted, crashing into the knee-deep snow. The impact sent a fresh wave of agony through his shoulder, so bright it cleared his vision. He grunted, lying still for a moment, tasting the snow and the copper of his own fear. He could not die here, not in the open. He dragged himself up. Using the stirrup leather, the mare stood, head drooping, too tired to bolt. "Sorry, girl," Jesse rasped. His voice was a dry croak. He left her, knowing she would not move. He stumbled toward the chapel's door. It hung crooked on one iron hinge. Jesse put his good shoulder to the wood and shoved. The door scraped open over a frozen floor, letting him into the gloom. The wind howl was replaced by a dead, hollow silence. Snow had drifted in through the gaping hole in the roof, piling against the far wall. A few broken pews lay scattered like kindling. It was cold, but at least the wind was gone. He took 2 steps in and stopped. He was not alone. In the far corner, tucked behind the shattered remains of an altar, a figure moved. Jesse's hand went to his hip, his fingers finding the walnut grip of his Colt. He pulled it, but the movement was slow, clumsy. "Don't," a voice whispered. It was a woman. He saw her then. She rose from the shadows, gaunt, her face pale and smudged with soot. Her dress was rags. She was holding a small pistol, a pocket revolver, and it was aimed straight at his chest. Behind her, half hidden in her skirts, was a child. A small boy, no more than 5 years old, his eyes wide and dark in the gloom. "Get out," the woman said. Her voice was shaking, rattling like dry leaves, but the gun was steady enough. Jesse raised his good hand, palm out. "Easy, ma'am. Just looking for shelter. There's no shelter here. Get out." He saw the bruises then, a dark, ugly purple mark on her cheek, disappearing into her hairline. Her knuckles were raw. This was not a woman waiting for a stagecoach. This was a woman hiding. "I mean you no harm," Jesse said. He tried to sound calm, but the effort was too much. The warmth of the chapel, slight as it was thawing his wound. The dull ache was turning sharp again, a hot poker twisting under his collarbone. "I said get out!" she shrieked, the sound cracking with panic. The boy behind her whimpered. Jessie took one more step, not toward her, but toward the relative safety of a standing pew. "Just let me sit. I'm hurt." He needed to show her he was not a threat. He let his good hand fall away from his gun belt. He tried to lean against the pew, but his legs had turned to water. The room was tilting. The woman's pale face and the black circle of the pistol's muzzle began to swim together. "Please," he managed, a word he had not used in years. He saw her eyes widen, her expression shifting from terror to confusion. He was not a monster. He was just a bleeding man. The floor came up to meet him. Jesse Creel, outlaw, betrayed and hunted, collapsed in a heap of snow and blood on the floor of a burnt-out church. The last thing he saw, the wide, terrified eyes of a child. Miriam Graves watched the man fall. He landed with a heavy, wet sound and did not move. Her pistol was still raised, her arm aching from the weight. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. "Is he dead, Mama?" The whisper came from her son. "Thomas, hush, child, stay back." She waited. The man lay still. A dark, wet stain was already spreading on the snow-dusted floorboards beneath his shoulder. His hat had rolled off, revealing sweat-matted brown hair. He was young, maybe 30. His face was hard-bitten, covered in stubble, but now it was slack, pale as milk. He was a threat. All men were a threat. He was armed, rough-looking, and he had found them. Her first instinct, the one that had kept her alive for 3 weeks, was to run, to grab Thomas and flee back into the storm. But where? The blizzard was a killer. They would be dead in an hour. Her second instinct was to put the pistol down and let him die. It was the safest play. Whoever he was running from something. Men like him brought pauses, and pauses brought questions. He was trouble, and she had enough trouble to last 10 lifetimes. If he died here, he was just one more body for the snow to claim. She looked at the small revolver in her hand. She had never fired it. Her husband, Daniel, had bought it for her 2 years ago, back when Laramie seemed like a good place. Before he died, before everything. She looked back at the fallen man. He moaned, a low, animal sound. He was not dead, not yet. "Mama?" Thomas said again, his small hand tugging at her skirt. She could not let him die. Not like this. If she watched a man bleed to death when she could have helped, what did that make her? How was she any different from Silas Danner? "Stay there, Thomas. Do not move." She lowered the pistol, her hands shaking violently now that the adrenaline was fading. She tucked it into the waistband of her skirt, at her back. She approached him slowly, as one would a wounded wolf. His breathing was shallow. His coat was a good one, or had been. She grabbed the collar with both hands and dragged. He was heavier than he looked. It took all her strength, her feet slipping on the icy floor, to pull him out of the snowmelt and deeper into the shelter, near the pitiful fire she had built in a ring of stones. She pulled his good arm from his coat. The other side was a nightmare. The wool was saturated. She used the man's own knife, pulled from his belt, to cut away the coat and the shirt beneath. The wound was high on the shoulder, close to the neck. It was a clean hole, but it was deep, and it had bled for a long time. She had no medicine, no bandages, only the small bundle of supplies she had managed to steal from her own home before she fled. "Thomas, bring me the water skin," she commanded. Her voice was steadier now. She had a purpose. She poured freezing water from the skin onto a rag, part of her old petticoat, and pressed it to the wound. The man inhaled sharply, his body tensing, but he did not wake. She cleaned it as best she could, the water turning pink, then red, then pink again. The blood was slowing. The cold was helping. She found a small flask of whiskey in his saddlebags, which he had dragged in with him. She poured a little on the wound. The man's body arched off the floor with a strangled yell, his eyes flying open. Jesse awoke to pure, white-hot agony. He stared, uncomprehending, into the woman's face. She was inches from him, her expression grim, her eyes a pale, washed-out blue, filled with a resolve that had not been there before. "Hold still," she ordered, "or you'll bleed out." He fell back, gritting his teeth, his head swimming. He watched as she tore another strip from the petticoat, wadded it, and pressed it hard into the entry wound. "This will hurt," she said. It was not an apology. She took the rest of the whiskey and, instead of giving him any, poured it over the wound again. He cursed, the sound tight in his throat. Then she bound it, wrapping the cloth tight, her movements quick and practiced. He lay there, panting, the world slowly coming back into focus. The chapel, the woman, the child. The boy was staring at him from behind the altar, a small ghost in the shadows. "Who are you?" Jesse rasped. The woman sat back on her heels. She looked exhausted. The bruise on her face seemed darker in the low light. "Miriam Graves." "Whose? Hunting you?" Her eyes snapped to his, the fear returning instantly. "We're just passing through, on our way to my sister's in Oregon." It was a lie, a poorly built, desperate lie. Jesse had been all over this territory. No one passed through these canyons in winter on their way to Oregon. Not a woman and a child, not with half a loaf of bread and a pocket pistol for defense, and not with that kind of bruise on her face. He looked at the boy. "He your son?" She nodded, her hand moving to her waist, near the pistol. "His name is Thomas. We're just passing through." Jesse let his head fall back against the saddlebag she had put under his head. Right, passing through. He did not believe her, and she knew he did not believe her. A silence settled between them, heavy and cold. He was too weak to be a threat, and she had, for some reason, chosen to save him. They were in a stalemate, trapped by the storm roaring outside. The storm did not abate. It howled for 2 full days. The chapel became a small, frozen island in a sea of white. The wind screamed through the burnt rafters, and the snow piled deeper in the exposed corners. They huddled around Miriam's small fire, feeding it scraps of the broken pews, piece by piece. The wood was damp and smoked terribly, but it was warmth. Jesse's fever came on the first night. He drifted in and out of a red, painful haze. He dreamed of the bank in Three Forks, of the deputy's surprised face, of Sykes laughing as he rode away. He dreamed of a prison fire, long ago, and the smell of smoke. Through it all, he was aware of Miriam. She was always there, just beyond the firelight. She gave him sips of snowmelt from a tin cup. She checked the binding on his shoulder. She did not speak to him, but she kept him alive. When the fever broke on the second day, he woke up clear-headed and weak. The chapel was quiet, save for the wind. Miriam was sitting against the far wall, her son asleep with his head in her lap. She was staring at the fire, her face empty. Jesse watched her. He had a good eye for people. It was what kept him alive when his partners did not. He saw the way she moved. She was not just tired. She was hunted. She jumped every time the wind hit the door. She ate almost nothing, giving her tiny portions of stale bread to the boy first, and only eating what he left. And there were the bruises. The one on her cheek was fading, but he saw others. When she reached to put wood on the fire, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a dark, mottled stain on her forearm, the clear and perfect shape of a man's thumbprint. This was not a woman running to Oregon. This was a woman running from a monster. He was hardened. He had seen the worst parts of the world. He had left men to die and had been left for dead himself. His first instinct, his only instinct, should be to get on his horse and ride. This woman and her child were an anchor. They were bait. They would get him caught, or get him killed. But he was still here. "You should have left me in the snow," he said. His voice was rough. Miriam's head snapped up. She looked at him, her eyes guarded. "It wasn't a Christian thing to do." "I ain't Christian," Jesse said, "and I'd wager this chapel hasn't been either for a long time." She looked away, stroking her son's hair. He's 5 years old. He doesn't need to see another man die. Another man, the words hung in the smoky air. Jesse did not press. He knew what desperation looked like. He was looking at it. He's a good boy, Jesse said quietly. Doesn't make a sound. He knows how to be quiet, she whispered. He's had to learn. A tense, unspoken truce settled. They were two fugitives, trapped by the weather, each carrying a past that could kill them. Later that afternoon, the wind finally died down. The silence that fell was sudden and heavy. "It's stopping," Miriam said, her voice tight. Jesse knew what that meant. The storm had been their shield. Now, the hunters, hers and his, would be moving again. He tried to sit up, pushing himself against the wall. The pain was still there, but it was manageable. "I need to check on my horse." "She's dead," Miriam said, not looking at him. "Froze, standing up. Yesterday morning." Jesse closed his eyes. He had expected it, but it was a bad blow. He was afoot, wounded, and responsible for two people who were in even worse shape. And then they heard it. It was not the wind. It was a horse, whinnying, close by on the trail below the chapel. Miriam went white. In one fluid movement, she scooped up the sleeping Thomas, clamped a hand over his mouth, and scrambled into the darkest shadow behind the altar, pulling the pistol from her skirt. Jesse's heart pounded. His Colt was on his hip. He pulled it, the weight familiar in his good hand. He dragged himself to the cracked chapel door, peering through the sliver of an opening. A man on a big gray horse was picking his way through the drifts. He wore a long oilskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He was not wearing a star, but he had the look of a bounty man or a ranch foreman. He stopped 20 yards from the chapel, scanning the ruin. Jesse's blood ran cold. He recognized the man. He was one of Danner's. His name was Fletcher. Silas Danner's top man. But why was he here? This was leagues from Danner's territory. Was he part of the posse from Three Forks? Fletcher dismounted, his shotgun in his hand, and started walking toward the chapel. Jesse's mind raced. He could shoot, but a shot would bring the rest of the posse, if there was one. And this man was not looking for him. He was tracking. Fletcher reached the door. Jesse held his breath, his pistol aimed at the wood. "Hello, the ruin," Fletcher called out. His voice was deep and abrasive. "Had a man wander off from our camp, bleeding, riding a bay mare. Seen him?" Jesse waited. The silence was absolute. Behind him, he could hear Miriam's ragged, terrified breathing. "I asked you a question," Fletcher yelled. He kicked the door, making the old hinge scream. Jesse had to make a choice. "Just me," Jesse called out, his voice low and gravelly. He stepped away from the door, keeping his gun hand hidden, but letting himself be seen. "Just trying to wait out the storm." Fletcher squinted at him. "You the one been bleeding?" "Caught a branch." Jesse lied. "Shoulder's fine, just resting." Fletcher studied him. His eyes were cold, like chips of ice. He looked past Jesse, into the smoky interior of the chapel. "You alone? You see anyone else?" Jesse said, gesturing with his good hand. Fletcher's gaze swept the shadows. Jesse knew he was looking for the bay mare. He was praying the snow had covered the horse's body. "Heard you were running with Sykes," Fletcher said. "Sykes left me for dead." Jesse spat. "If you find him, tell him I'm coming for him." Fletcher seemed to accept this, or perhaps he just did not care. His eyes moved over the snow around the door. Jesse knew he was looking for other tracks, but the blizzard had covered everything. "I saw no woman," Jesse added, his voice hard. Fletcher's head snapped back to him. His eyes narrowed. "Who said anything about a woman?" Fletcher asked. A terrible, cold understanding dawned on Jesse. Fletcher was not here for him. He was part of a different hunt. "Just figured a man who gets lost might be chasing something," Jesse said, trying to cover his mistake. Fletcher stared at him for a long, heavy moment. He looked at Jesse's shoulder, at the smoke curling from the roof, and back at Jesse's face. "Stay out of the wind," Fletcher finally said. It'll kill you." He turned, walked back to his horse, and mounted. He sat for another moment, looking up at the burnt-out steeple, then urged his horse back onto the trail, disappearing into the snow-draped pines. Jesse waited until the sound of the horse was gone. He leaned against the door, his body trembling, not from the cold, but from the tension. He had lied. He had inserted himself into her trouble. He slid the door shut and barred it. He turned back to the gloom. Miriam was still huddled behind the altar, clutching her son, her whole body shaking so hard he could see it from across the room. That night, they sat by the fire, the last of the pews burning. The chapel was dead silent. The boy was asleep, wrapped in Jesse's saddle blanket. Jesse looked at Miriam. The encounter with Fletcher had broken the last of her defenses. She was hollowed out by fear. He did not ask who Fletcher was. He did not ask who Silas Danner was. He did not ask what she had seen, or why they were hunting her like an animal. He did not need to. He had seen it in her eyes when the rider's voice cut through the air. She was not just running. She was being erased. Jesse took a piece of dried beef from his bag and offered it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was freezing. She looked up at him, the firelight catching the desperation in her gaze. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, then closed it. "You're safe," Jesse said. "For tonight." She just shook her head, a slow, tragic movement. "There is no safe, not for us." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the walls like ghosts. Jesse watched her, this woman who had saved his life, and who was now, whether he liked it or not, his responsibility. He was an outlaw. He ran from men with stars. She was running from something else, something older and darker. Miriam was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep, but as the fire burned down to red coals, filling the chapel with a dim, warm light, she turned her face to him. Tears were streaming silently down her bruised cheeks. She whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost in the settling of the old wood. "Please," she said, "don't let them find me." Jesse's shoulder was a geography of pain. It was a hot, jagged peak when he moved, and a low, swampy ache when he sat still. The fever was gone, but the weakness remained, a cold leech on his strength. He knew, with the certainty of a man who had survived gunshot before, that if he did not clean the wound properly, the rot would set in, and he knew, with the certainty of a hunted man, that Fletcher's visit meant this chapel was a tomb. "We're moving," he said. It was the third morning. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy gray, spitting sleet. Miriam looked up from where she was trying to repair Thomas's boot with a piece of string. Her face was thin, almost translucent. "Moving where? Back into that?" "He'll be back," Jesse said. "That man, Fletcher, he wasn't satisfied. He knows I lied. He just doesn't know what I lied about. He'll come back, maybe with others. We can't travel in this. Thomas will freeze." "We're not traveling far." Jesse pushed himself to his feet, grunting as the muscles in his shoulder pulled. "I know this pass. There's an old prospector's cabin, higher up, tucked under a ridge. You can't see it from the trail. You can't see it from anywhere." "If he's tracking us, he's tracking you," Jesse said, his voice flat. "And me, now. We need the storm. We need it to cover our tracks." He looked at the remaining pews. "Help me." It took 2 hours. He was a one-armed man, and she was half-starved. But desperation gave them strength. Jesse used his knife and brute force to split the seat of a pew into 2 long, flat runners. He salvaged the rope from his own saddle rigging, the leather frozen stiff. He knocked apart the remains of the altar, finding 2 straight pieces of wood to use as cross braces. He lashed it all together, his breath pluming, his teeth grit against the pain. It was not a sled, it was a travois, a crude triangle of wood, but it would hold their supplies. Miriam watched him, her eyes wide with a fragile, dawning thing. It was not hope, it was worse. It was reliance. "Get the boy ready," Jesse commanded, trying to knot a rope with one hand and his teeth. Miriam came over. She did not speak. She took the rope and, with her small, raw-knuckled hands, tied a knot that was tighter and cleaner than he could have managed. She had a pioneer's hands. They waited. The sleet turned back to snow, thick and wet, falling straight down. "Now," Jesse said. They packed their few belongings, the saddlebags, the blanket, the last of the bread, and the tin pot. Miriam wrapped Thomas in her own shawl until only his eyes were visible. Jesse put his rifle, cleaned and oiled, onto the travois. He looked at the body of his bay mare, a snow-covered mound by the chapel wall. He took his knife and cut the remaining leather from the saddle. He could not afford to leave anything useful. "You carry the boy." He told Miriam, "Stay behind me. Step where I step. Do not fall behind." She nodded, hoisting Thomas onto her hip. The boy, silent as ever, wrapped his legs around her waist. Jesse threw the travois harness over his good shoulder. The weight dug in. He led them out of the ruin and into the white. The climb was agony. It was not a trail. It was a suggestion of a path. A goat scrambled up the side of the canyon. The snow was deep, clogging his boots, pulling at the travois until it felt loaded with anvils. Every step was a fresh betrayal from his wounded shoulder. The rope cut deep, the pain so sharp it made him see black at the edges of his vision. He did not look back. He just listened. He listened for the slip of Miriam's boots and the quiet, rhythmic sound of her breathing, right behind him. She did not complain. She did not falter. She just climbed, after what felt like a lifetime. The trees grew thicker, the ridgeline flattened, and the wind seemed to find a new, higher pitch. Jesse pushed through a screen of snow-heavy pines and stopped. In here, it was almost invisible, tucked into a deep cleft of granite. The cabin was more of a dugout than a building. Its front was rough-hewn timber, but its back and sides were the mountain itself. The roof was low, covered in a thick layer of sod and now a foot of snow. It was a hole, a perfect, defensible hole. The door was a single slab of wood on leather hinges. Jesse kicked the ice from the threshold and put his good shoulder to it. It groaned open into a small, dark space that smelled of pine tar, cold ash, and pack rats. It was tiny, a single room, no bigger than a horse stall. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a chimney built of mud and rock. A crude bed frame, strung with rotting rope, sat in the corner. That was all. Miriam slid in past him, her eyes darting into the dark corners. She let Thomas down, and the boy immediately went to the farthest, darkest spot, hiding behind her skirts. Jesse pulled the travois inside and slammed the door. The silence was immediate. The wind's scream was gone. Muffled by the stone and earth, there was only the sound of their own ragged breathing. "It's—" Miriam started, her voice a whisper. "It's small." "It's safe," Jesse said. He was leaning against the wall, his chest heaving. "No one's been here for years." He pointed to the fireplace. "Get a fire going. Use the bed frame. I need to sit." Miriam worked quickly. She broke the dry, rotted wood of the bed frame over her knee, laid the kindling in the hearth, and struck a match from her small, precious supply. The fire caught. It was the first real warmth they had felt in weeks. The flames lit the tiny space, painting the log walls in shades of orange and yellow. The cabin was tight. They were close enough to touch, no matter where they stood. Jesse slid down the wall, his wounded shoulder throbbing in the new warmth. Miriam set the pot in the fire, filled with snow to melt for water. Thomas, seeing the fire, crept out of the shadows. He sat on the floor, mesmerized by the light, but still kept his mother between himself and the wounded man. For 3 days, the snow fell, and the world shrank to the 4 walls of that cabin. They settled into a strange, silent routine. Jesse was too weak to do more than sit, clean his weapons, and feed wood into the fire. His shoulder had begun to heal, the edges of the wound closing, but it had drained him. Miriam was the one who moved. She kept the cabin clean, melted the snow, and rationed their food. They were down to dried beef and half a bag of flour. She made a thin, watery gruel from the flour and snowmelt, and it was the best meal Jesse had ever eaten. The isolation was complete, but it was the tightness of the cabin that changed things. They could not avoid each other. They heard every breath, every sigh, every stomach rumble. And Jesse began to watch Thomas. The boy was a shadow. He had not spoken a single word since Jesse had met him. He communicated in tugs on his mother's skirt, in wide-eyed stares, in the small, silent way he moved. He was a child who had learned that survival depended on invisibility. On the fourth day, Jesse was feeling stronger. He was sitting by the fire, using his knife to carve a piece of the bed frame. He was not making anything in particular, just letting the blade do the work, feeling the muscle in his good arm. Thomas was watching him. He sat just outside the circle of Jesse's reach. "You like knives?" Jesse asked. His voice was rough from disuse. Thomas flinched, his eyes darting to his mother. Miriam gave a small nod, her hands busy mixing another flour paste. The boy looked back at Jesse and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "This is a good one," Jesse said, holding up the Bowie knife. "My father gave it to me. Said a man's knife is his third hand. He shaved off a long, thin curl of wood. Knew a man once, down in the territories, had a trained bird, a crow, smartest thing you ever saw. That bird could untie knots, stole coins. That man would send him into the saloon, and the bird would fly down, pick a nickel right off the bar, and fly it back." Thomas's eyes were fixed on him. "This man, he taught the bird to say one thing," Jesse continued, his voice low and rhythmic. "Taught him to say nevermore. Stupidest thing, the man's name was Lenore, but the bird, he got it wrong. He'd fly around that saloon, all the miners drinking, and this black bird would land on the mirror and just yell, 'More, more!'" Jesse smiled, a rare, dry crack of his lips. "That bird drank more whiskey than the prospectors. Got mean, too." He finished carving. He had made a small, rough shape, a bird. He held it out. Thomas did not move. "Go on," Jesse said. "It's just wood." Slowly, the boy crept forward. He looked at his mother, who nodded again, her face soft. Thomas reached out a small, dirty hand and took the wooden bird. He studied it. "More," Thomas whispered. His voice was a tiny, reedy sound. Jesse stared at him. Miriam froze, her hands deep in the flour sack. "What's that, son?" Jesse asked. "More," Thomas said again, louder. He looked at Jesse, a flicker of something bright in his dark eyes. "Tell me more about the bird." A fragile thing had been built, and Jesse Creel, the outlaw, had been the one to build it. He told the boy stories until the sun went down, yarns about desert canyons that sang, about horses that could run faster than the wind, and about a life that was not filled with fear. That night, after Thomas was asleep on his pallet of blankets, the cabin was quiet again. The fire popped. Outside, the wind had returned, a low moan over the roof. Miriam was sitting on the other side of the hearth, mending Jesse's coat. Her needlework was neat, precise. "He hasn't spoken," she said, her voice just as low as the wind. "Not to a stranger, not since his father died. He's a smart boy," Jesse said. "He just needed a reason to talk. You were kind." Jesse had been called many things in his life: killer, thief, traitor, but never kind. The words sat uncomfortably in the air between them. "He's a kid," Jesse said, shrugging his good shoulder. "Kids like stories. They were gentle stories." She looked at him, her pale blue eyes searching his face in the firelight. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of it was still there. "Who is he, Miriam?" Jesse asked. His voice was soft. He was not demanding. He was asking. "The man who gave you that bruise, the man Fletcher was looking for, who is Silas Danner?" Miriam's hand stilled. The needle stopped in the wool. She stared at the coat in her lap. "You heard the name," she whispered. "Fletcher, in the chapel. He was Danner's man. I've seen him. But I don't know why he's up here, and I don't know why he's hunting a woman and a child." Miriam set the coat aside. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. A fortress of one. "My husband, Daniel," she began, her voice flat, as if reciting a story she had told herself 1,000 times. "He was a carpenter, a good man. We had a small claim outside Laramie. He died last year, the influenza. It took him in 3 days." She was quiet for a long time, just watching the flames. After the funeral, Silas Danner came to call. He owns the Double D Ranch. He owns everything south of the river. He owns the bank, the saloon, and he owns Sheriff Rollins. Jesse said nothing. He knew the type. Every territory had one. He offered to buy my claim. He said a widow and a child had no business living so far out. I told him no. The claim was Daniel's. It was Thomas's. She took a ragged breath. That was my mistake. 2 days later, Sheriff Rollins rode out. He had papers. He said his records showed that the preacher who married Daniel and me, back in Cheyenne, he wasn't licensed by the territory. He said our marriage was never legal. He's a liar, Jesse said. It didn't matter, Miriam said, her voice breaking. He said if the marriage was not legal, then Thomas, my son, was a bastard. The word hung in the cabin, ugly and sharp. He said the county had a right to take illegitimate children, to put them in the orphanage in Cheyenne, for their moral upbringing. He said I was an unfit mother, living alone. And Danner, Jesse finished, the cold, sick realization settling in. Danner rode up right behind him. He was kind. He was gentle. He said it was a terrible tragedy. He said he could protect me. He said if I became his wife, he could adopt Thomas legally. He could stop the county. He could save us. So you married him. I was remarried. She spat, the word full of venom. He brought the papers. He brought Judge Hemlock, who was so drunk he could barely sign his name. I signed. What choice did I have? They would have taken my son. Jesse looked at the sleeping boy, who was smiling, dreaming of talking crows. But it was not a marriage, Miriam continued, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. He did not take me to his ranch. He left me in my house, that he now owned. He called it his hunting lodge. He would visit when he was tired of his wife, his real wife, in town. Jesse's good hand clenched into a fist. He understood violence. He understood greed. And he understood this. Why run now? Why not months ago? I couldn't. He had men, Fletcher, watching the house. But 3 weeks ago, he came. He was drunk and a drifter, a man looking for work. He passed by. He heard me. He heard Danner yelling. The man. He tried to stop him. He was a young man. He just told Danner to leave the lady be. Miriam was shaking now, the tears she had held back finally coming, silent and hot. Silas just laughed. He pulled his pistol. He shot that boy. Right in my kitchen, right in front of me. She choked on a sob, covering her mouth. He just fell. Silas looked at me, and he looked at Thomas, who was screaming, and he said, "That is what happens to men who interfere in my business." He told Fletcher to bury the body in the Alkali Flats. He left. He said he would be back in 3 days. To finish our business. I knew he would kill us. He couldn't let us live. Knowing what we saw, he would kill me, and he would take Thomas. I don't know. I ran. I grabbed the food I had and my pistol, and I ran into the hills. We've been hiding, living in the cold, until you found us. She was weeping freely now, her thin shoulders shaking. Jesse sat there, the firelight catching the old scars on his knuckles. He had heard many confessions. This was the first one that made him want to be a better man, or a worse one. He let the silence stretch, giving her time. When her sobs quieted into ragged breaths, he spoke. "I am running too," he said. She looked up, her face wet and blotched. "That wound," he said, touching his shoulder. "I was in a bank in Three Forks. My partner, Sykes, he set it up. But it was a trap. A deputy walked in. A kid. He drew on me. I was faster. It was self-defense. But it doesn't matter. A dead lawman is a dead lawman." He stared into the fire, seeing a different fire, years ago. "My brother, Eli. He was younger than me. Not smart. He stole a horse. They sent him to the territorial prison. A fire started, in the laundry. It spread to the cell block. The guards, they had the keys. They stood outside and watched. They didn't unlock the doors. They said it was too dangerous. They let 30 men burn to death." He picked up the wooden bird, turning it over in his hand. "Eli. He was a good man. He just made a mistake. Danner, Sheriff Rollins, they're the same. They're the men with the keys. They decide who burns." He put the bird down. "I'm on the run for shooting a deputy, but I'm an outlaw because I'd rather be the man in the fire than the man holding the keys." They sat in the shared silence. Two people branded by the same iron. Injustice. That night, the cold was deeper. The fire burned low, the last of the bed frame turning to embers. Jesse was on his pallet, Miriam on hers, Thomas between them. A scream tore the darkness. Jesse was on his feet, his Colt in his hand, before he was even awake. "No, please don't touch him." It was Miriam. She was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. She was clawing at her blankets, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was not in the cabin. She was back in the kitchen. "Miriam," Jesse said, his voice low, gentle. He kept his distance. "He's just a boy. Please, Silas, no. "Miriam." He said her name, louder, sharper. "You're here. You are in the cabin. You are safe." She blinked, her eyes focused on him, on the gun in his hand. The terror shifted, but did not fade. I... She looked around, her chest still heaving. She saw Thomas, still asleep, and her body crumpled. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. Not the quiet tears of before, but the wrenching, broken sobs of a soul that had seen too much. Jesse put the gun down. He sat on the edge of his own pallet. He did not know what to do. Comfort was not his trade. He was standing over Thomas, she choked out. He had the gun. It was a dream, Miriam, just the dream. "It's never just a dream," she whispered. It's just what hasn't happened yet." He moved, slowly, so as not to startle her. He sat on the floor beside her pallet. He did not touch her. He just sat. He was a solid presence in the dark, a wall against the night. They sat like that for a long time. The fire was almost out. The cabin was growing cold. "I'm so cold," she whispered, her teeth chattering. But it was not from the temperature. "Here." He reached over and put his blanket around her shoulders. She leaned, just slightly, toward him. Her shoulder brushed his good arm. He did not pull away. She did not move. They sat, almost touching, sharing the small space, the silence, the fear. He could smell her. She smelled of wood smoke, of flour, and of fear. He turned his head. She was looking at him. Her face, in the dying ember light, was a map of tragedy. But her eyes were alive, and they were looking at him. He reached up, his rough, calloused hand moving without his permission. He was just going to... He did not know. He touched her cheek, the one that had been bruised. His thumb was gentle against her skin. She did not flinch. She did not pull back. She leaned into his touch, a small, involuntary movement. Closing her eyes, he leaned in. The kiss was not a kiss of passion. It was hesitant. It was raw. It was the taste of chapped lips, of smoke, of salt from her tears. It was two broken things, colliding in the dark. It was a question, and an answer, and a prayer, all in one. It lasted only a second. Jesse pulled back. The reality of what he had done crashed into him. She was terrified, vulnerable. He was a wounded outlaw. He was taking advantage. "Miriam," he rasped, his voice thick. I'm sorry, not like this." He started to pull away. "No." Her voice was a thread. He stopped. "Don't go," she whispered. Her hand, small and cold, found his. She did not grip him. She just rested her hand in his. "Please, just stay beside me. Don't leave me alone." He did not move back to his pallet. He did not lie down beside her. He just sat, his back against the cold stone of the fireplace, his good arm resting on his knee. She settled back onto her pallet, but she turned onto her side, facing him. She kept her hand in his. He sat awake, his pistol by his leg, and watched her fall into a true, deep sleep, his hand holding hers. When the first gray light of morning crept into the cabin, Jesse was slumped against the wall, his head on his chest, asleep. His hand was still linked with Miriam's. Thomas woke first. He sat up, his blanket pooling in his lap. He saw his mother, asleep, her face relaxed, no lines of fear, and he saw the big man, Jesse, asleep beside her, their hands joined between them. He saw the man's gun on the floor. He saw the wooden bird on his own blanket. He looked at his mother, and he looked at Jesse. A slow, quiet smile spread across his face. It was the first time Jesse had seen the child truly relax. Jesse, woken by the light, opened his eyes. He did not see the boy's smile. He only saw the boy watching them. He let go of Miriam's hand as if it were a hot coal, a sudden shame rising in him. But the boy did not look scared. He just looked content. Thomas picked up the wooden bird and, without a word, crawled over and placed it in Jesse's lap. The days bled into a week, then two. The tiny cabin, once a dark hole of desperation, became a world. The mountains sealed them in, and a strange, fragile peace settled. Jesse's shoulder healed, moving from a hot agony to a stiff, pulling ache. The wound was clean, thanks to Miriam's care and the biting cold. With his strength returning, he took on the role of provider, his good arm and his wits working in tandem. He was quiet, but his movements were a language. He spent the first few days of his recovery reinforcing the cabin, chinking the logs with mud and moss to kill the drafts, building a new, sturdier door latch from the remnants of the bed. Then, he began to venture out. He salvaged what he could from his frozen mare, a grim task he performed alone, returning with the remaining rope and his rifle's saddle scabbard. He took the small, spare revolver from his saddlebags, checking its load. The rest he left for the scavengers. He was afoot, and that made him a target, but it also made him quiet. He used the rope to build snares, setting a trap line in the woods just below the ridge. He was good at it, a skill learned in a different, harder life. He brought back rabbits, small and lean, and once, a fool grouse that had been sitting on a pine branch. Each time he returned, pushing open the heavy door to the smell of wood smoke and the sight of them. A strange, unwelcome feeling would settle in his chest. It was a tightness he mistook for pain, until he recognized it. It was warmth. Inside the cabin, Miriam built her own world. She was the keeper of the fire, the one who turned his meager offerings into sustenance. The rabbits and grouse became a thin but hot stew, stretched with the last of their flour, seasoned with pine needles. It was a bitter, smoky flavor, but it was life. Her greatest work was with Thomas. The boy, having found his voice, was now hungry for the world. Miriam, with no books, no slate, took a piece of charcoal from the hearth and began to trace letters onto scraps of bark. Jesse would sit, cleaning his rifle, pretending not to listen as her low, steady voice filled the cabin. "B," she would say, her finger tracing the shape. "Like bird," like the one Jesse made. Thomas, his dark head bent close to hers, would repeat the sound. Bird. They shared moments that were new to all of them. One afternoon, Miriam was washing their few clothes in the pot, the cabin filled with steam. She had hung a line of Jessie's string across the room as she went to hang a small shirt. Jessie, sitting up from mending a snare, turned, and they bumped into each other in the tiny space. He put his good hand on her arm to steady her. "Sorry, my fault," she whispered. They stood like that, too close, the steam rising around them. He was aware of her smell, of the dampness of her hair, of the way her eyes flickered from his hand, to his chest, to his mouth. He let go, stepping back, the space between them suddenly crackling. Another night, they were eating the stew. It was thick, for once. Jessie had trapped 2 rabbits that day. Thomas, holding his tin cup with 2 hands, took a sip and suddenly laughed. It was a real laugh, a high, clear, childish sound that bounced off the low ceiling. He had found a chunk of carrot Jessie had dug from a frozen pack rat's stash. Miriam's head snapped up, her eyes wide, as if she had forgotten the sound. A slow, beautiful smile transformed her face, erasing the fear, the hunger, the bruises. She looked at Jessie, her eyes shining in the firelight. He found himself smiling back, a real, unguarded smile, one that felt like it pulled unused muscles. In that moment, Jesse Creel felt something he had not felt since he was a boy, before his father died, before Eli, before the prisons and the posses. He felt peace. He thought he had lost it forever, that it was a luxury for other men, for men who had not done what he had done, seen what he had seen. But it was here, in this dirt-floored hole in the mountain, with a hunted woman and a small, quiet boy. The knowledge of it, the simple naming of it, terrified him more than any posse. Peace was something you could lose. It was something they could take from you. The next day, he went out to check his traps, but his mind was not on the snares. He was scouting. The peace had made him soft, and he knew it. He pushed farther down the ridge, his rifle light in his hands, his eyes scanning the snow. He found the tracks an hour later, on the lee side of a granite outcrop. They were fresh, maybe a day old. 2 men, on foot, heading east, along the spine of the ridge. They were not his tracks, and they were not the small, worn boot tracks of Miriam and Thomas. These were big, heavy, made by men wearing new boots with sharp heels. Jesse knelt, his hand hovering over the print. He felt the cold return, not just to the air, but to his blood. They were searching, this high up. He followed the tracks, his body moving in a low crouch, rifle ready. He was no longer a provider. He was an outlaw again. The tracks led him to a small clearing, and he saw it. On a low-hanging thorn bush, a piece of dark blue wool was caught. It was a single, torn thread from a woman's shawl. Her shawl, the one she had worn in the chapel, the one she had wrapped Thomas in. He reached out and touched it, his glove pulling back. It was not just caught, it was tied. A small, tight knot. It was planted. It was a marker, a signal. Fletcher, or one of his men, had been here. He had found a scrap of her trail, and he was marking it for the others. He was sweeping the mountains, grid by grid. He was not just hunting, he was trapping. Jesse yanked the thread from the thorn and shoved it in his pocket. He scrambled back to the cabin, moving fast, his breath clouding in front of him. The memory of that small, shared smile making him sick with fear. He burst through the door, not bothering to be quiet. Miriam and Thomas both flinched. The lesson stopped. "Pack," Jesse said. His voice was a rasp. Miriam stood up, her face draining of color. What? What is it?" "They're here, on the ridge. They're sweeping the mountain. They left a marker." He threw the scrap of blue wool onto the small table. She stared at it, her hand flying to her mouth. "We're leaving," Jesse said. "Now. We'll take what we can carry and head east, over the pass." He was already moving, stuffing the last of the dried rabbit meat into his saddlebag, checking his ammunition. No. The word was so quiet, he almost did not hear it. He stopped, turning to her. "What did you say?" "No," Miriam said again. She was standing by the fire, her hands clenched at her sides. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her son, who had hidden behind her. "I won't. I can't." Jesse stared at her. disbelieving. "What are you talking about? They are here. They will find this cabin. They will kill us. And where will we go? Jesse?" Her voice was rising, cracking with a despair that was deeper than fear. "Over the pass? Into another storm? Into another canyon? We will freeze, or we will starve. And if we do not, they will find us there, or the next place, or the one after that." She finally looked at him, her pale eyes blazing with a terrible, weary fire. "There is no safe place," she whispered. "Don't you understand? I have been running my whole life, running from being poor, running from being alone, running from him. I am so tired of running." "So you'd rather die?" he snapped, his own fear turning to anger. "You'd rather let him find you, let him put his hands on you, on that boy?" She flinched as if he had struck her. "Do not," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Do not use him against me. He is the only reason I have run this far." A thick, vibrating silence filled the room. Thomas was crying, his small sobs muffled in his mother's skirt. Jesse looked at the woman, at the child, at the tiny, smoky cabin that had become a home. He saw the charcoal letters on the bark. He felt the phantom warmth of her hand in his. She was right. Running was not enough. He walked over and took the spare revolver from his saddlebag. It was a Colt Peacemaker, smaller than his own, but balanced. He checked the cylinder, fully loaded. He pressed it into her hand. Her hand was cold, and the gun was heavy. It dropped her arm. "No," she said, trying to give it back. "Daniel, he bought me one. I had it in the chapel, but I don't know how. You're going to learn." Jesse said. His voice was flat, hard. "You're right. We can't run forever. So we're going to stop. And if they find us, you're going to fight." He grabbed her arm. "Outside, now!" He pulled her from the cabin, into the biting cold. Thomas stayed inside, his small, terrified face pressed to a crack in the door. Jesse led her 100 yards from the cabin, to a place where the rock wall would stop a stray bullet. He shoved a tin can into the snow on top of a log. "Hold it," he said. She held the gun with 2 hands, her arms shaking. "It's too heavy." "It's not," he said, stepping behind her. "You're just scared of it." He put his body close to hers, shielding her from the wind. His chest was against her back. He put his good arm around her, his hand covering hers on the grip. "This is your life," he whispered, his voice by her ear, hot in the cold air. "This is Thomas's life. You hold it steady. You pull your arm straight." He adjusted her grip, forcing her fingers into place. He could feel her shaking, or maybe he was shaking too. The proximity was electric, charged with the fear and the anger and the unspoken thing that had been growing between them. She was small against him, but he could feel the wiry strength in her. "Your thumb," he murmured. "Here, not here. You'll break it. Good. Now, you look down the barrel. You see the sight? You put it on the can. You don't look at the can. You look at the sight." She took a ragged breath. She smelled of smoke and fear. "I can't. You can. You will." His voice was iron. "Breathe out, slowly, and when you're at the end of the breath, you don't pull the trigger. You squeeze it. You squeeze it gentle, like you're trying to surprise yourself." He put his finger over hers on the trigger. "Like this. With me. Squeeze." The explosion was deafening. The gun kicked, bucking in her hands, the force of it slamming her back against his chest. The smell of sulfur and burnt powder filled the air. The tin can was gone. Miriam stood frozen, her arm still outstretched, smoke curling from the barrel. Jesse let go of her hand, stepping back. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, a wild, terrified, powerful look on her face. She was still holding the gun, but it was not heavy anymore. She breathed. "I did it." He looked at her, at the flush on her pale cheeks, at the way her lips were parted. The desire that he had been fighting, that he had buried under duty and fear, rose up so fast it stole his breath. This was not a victim. This was not a woman running. This was a woman holding fire. He did not say anything. He just took the gun from her, reloaded the spent cartridge, and gave it back. Again, he said, by yourself. That night, the storm returned. It came in with a fury, a howling wind that rattled the new door latch and drove snow against the tiny window pane. The world was white and sound and rage. Inside, the cabin was an island of quiet. Thomas was asleep. The gun lesson had exhausted and terrified him, and he had succumbed to sleep quickly. Jesse and Miriam sat by the fire. They had not spoken since they came back inside. He had cleaned the guns. She had made a thin stew. They had eaten. The silence was heavier than the storm. He was sitting on his pallet. She was on hers, across the small hearth. The air was too thick. It was charged with the gunfire, with her desperate no, with his hand on hers, with the knowledge that men were on the mountain, and that this night might be their last. She stood up. Jesse's hand went to his pistol. A reflex. She crossed the 3 feet of space between them. She knelt in front of him, on his pallet, her knees brushing his. "Miriam?" he started, his voice a croak. "They won't touch you, I swear." She whispered. It was what he had said to her. No, it wasn't. It was the promise he would make tomorrow. He was confused. She was not quoting him. She was. No, that wasn't it. She just knelt before him, the firelight painting one side of her face in gold, the other in shadow. She was not crying. She was not asking. She reached out and, with a hand that was not shaking, she touched his face. Her fingers traced the scar on his jaw. "You are a good man, Jesse Creel," she whispered. "No, I'm not," he said, his voice rough. "I'm a killer. I'm a thief." "You are gentle," she said, as if he had not spoken. "You gave my son stories. You taught me to fight. You stayed." He closed his eyes at her touch. "We might die tomorrow," she said. It was not a question. It was a fact. "We might," he agreed, opening his eyes. "I will not," she said, her voice dropping. "Die in that house. I will not die as his property. I will not die as a victim. If this is the last night, I want to be alive. I want to be me." She leaned in. She kissed him. It was not the hesitant, fearful kiss from the cabin. This was not the broken woman from the chapel. This was the woman who had hit the tin can. The kiss was deep, and it was desperate, and it was hungry. It was the taste of wood smoke and tears and a desperation that was not for survival, but for life. He kissed her back. All the walls he had built, all the reasons he was the wrong man, all the danger. It burned away in the heat of her mouth. He put his good hand in her hair, pulling her close, his other arm, the wounded one, wrapping around her waist. Their love-making was not gentle. It was raw. It was desperate. It was two people who had been hunted and beaten and broken, who were now clinging to each other as the world tried to tear them apart. It was a claiming. It was an act of defiance. It was silent, save for the sound of the storm outside and their own breathing, sharp and ragged in the small, hot cabin. It was frantic and clumsy and perfect. After they lay tangled in the blankets, the fire burned down to embers. The storm still raged, a distant, muffled howl. She was quiet for a long time. Jesse thought she had fallen asleep. Then he felt her body shake, a small, suppressed sob. He tensed. Miriam? He thought it was shame. He thought it was regret. He had taken advantage. He was a monster, just like Danner. He started to pull away, but she clung to him, her fingers gripping his shirt. "No," she wept, her voice muffled against his chest. "Don't, please, don't let go." She cried. She cried for her dead husband, for the murdered drifter, for the boy in the kitchen, for the fear, for the running, and she cried for this. I'm sorry," he whispered, his scarred hand clumsy as he tried to stroke her hair. I shouldn't have. "No," she said, pulling her head back to look at him. Her face was a mess of tears, but her eyes were clear. You don't understand. She took a shuddering breath. I'm not crying because I'm ashamed. I'm crying because this is the first time in so long that I have felt safe. She buried her face in his neck, her tears hot on his skin. I'm safe, right now, in this cabin, with you. I am safe. Jesse Creel, the outlaw, the man who brought only trouble and death, held her. He held her as she wept, and he felt a fierce, terrifying protectiveness surge in him, stronger than any fear, stronger than any desire. It was a vow. He held her until her breathing evened out, until she was asleep, heavy and warm against him. He did not sleep. He lay awake, watching the last embers die, his promise solidifying in his heart. He brushed the damp hair from her cheek, his rough fingers gentle. They won't touch you, he swore, his voice a low rasp in the dark. I swear. As dawn broke, gray and cold, the storm had passed, leaving a dead, heavy silence. Miriam was still asleep, curled against him. Thomas was a lump under his own blankets. Jesse slid out of the pallet, his movements slow, his body aching, but his mind sharp. He had a plan. He could not just protect her. He had to save her. He knew a man, Judge Abram March, in Laramie, Wyoming. March had been a friend of his father's, back before the war. He was an old, cantankerous man who hated two things: corruption and Silas Danner. Danner had crossed him on a land deal a decade ago, and March never forgot a slight. If Jesse could get a message to him, if he could get Miriam's testimony to him, he would have to ride. He had no horse. He would have to walk. He would walk to the nearest trading post, 2 days east, at the edge of the pass. He would send a telegraph. It would cost money. He had a few dollars left. It would have to be enough. He was a wanted man. Walking into a trading post, into a telegraph office, was a death sentence. But sitting here, waiting for Fletcher, was a death sentence, too. He began to pack. His knife, his ammunition, the last of the dried meat. He would leave the revolver with Miriam. He quietly opened the cabin door, just a crack, to check the weather, to see the lay of the new snow. He was planning his route, his mind already 2 days ahead. In the trading post, at the telegraph key, he looked up, and his blood turned to ice. On the ridge opposite their cabin, the one Fletcher had been on, a thin, gray tendril of smoke was rising in the still, morning air. He watched, his heart stopping, as a second plume of smoke rose, a mile to the south. It was not a campfire. It was a signal. They were not just searching. They were communicating. They were closing in. They were coming, and they were coming fast. The first thing Jesse saw was the smoke, a thin, gray finger rising from the far ridge, stark against the new, clean white of the morning. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just watched, his heart a cold stone in his chest. A second plume rose. Farther south, a signal. He stepped back from the door, his movement quiet, but the sudden, cold draft woke Miriam. She sat up, clutching the blanket, her hair wild, her eyes soft and heavy with sleep. And for one agonizing second, they were just two people in a cabin. Then she saw his face. "Jesse? They're here," he said. His voice was flat, all the warmth of the night gone. "Smoke on the ridge. They're signaling. They're closing in." The fear was instant. It flooded her face, washing away the woman from the night and leaving the fugitive. "What do? We run. We split." He was already moving, his mind working with a cold, fast precision. He grabbed his rifle. He checked his ammunition. He shoved the last of the dried meat into his saddlebag. "Split?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll lead them away." He strapped the bag over his good shoulder. "I'll go north. I'll leave a track they can't miss. They're hunting me as much as you. They'll follow. It'll buy you time." "No!" She scrambled off the pallet, grabbing his arm. "No, Jesse, you can't. You're one man. They have horses. They'll kill you. We'll go together. East, now! And let them ride us down. With Thomas?" He put his hand on her, his grip hard. "They're on the ridge. They'll see us. This is the only way." He took her face in his good hand, forcing her to look at him. "You are smart. Miriam, you are a survivor. You will get Thomas out of here. I can't." "Yes, you can." He took the spare revolver from his belt and pushed it into her hand. "You keep this. You keep it ready. After I'm gone, you wait. You wait 1 hour. You listen. If you hear shooting, you don't wait. You grab Thomas, you grab the bag, and you go east. You go over the pass, and you don't look back. You go to Laramie. You find Judge March." "Jesse." The tears were coming, hot and fast. "No time." He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was hard, fast, and desperate. It was the taste of goodbye, of fear, of burnt powder. "Now, bar the door behind me. Don't light a fire. Don't make a sound. Don't open it. Not for anyone. Not for any reason." "Only for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Bar the door," he repeated. He looked at Thomas, who was awake, watching, his small face pale. Jesse nodded at him, a man's nod. Then he turned, slipped out of the cabin, and was gone. Miriam shoved the heavy bar into place, her whole body shaking. She fell against the door, her forehead pressed to the cold wood. As she listened to his footsteps, deliberately heavy, crunching away in the snow, moving north, Jesse ran. He did not run east, toward safety. He ran north, toward the open, exposed spine of the mountain. He made no effort to hide his tracks. He left a trail a blind man could follow. He was the rabbit, and the hounds were on the mountain. He heard the shout after 10 minutes. A single, triumphant yell. "He's here, on the ridge, this way!" They had found his trail. They had taken the bait. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, the cold air like a knife. His wounded shoulder ached, and his new wound from the night before, the cut on his side, pulled with every step. The snow was deep, up to his knees, and it was like running through wet sand. The trees thinned. He was on an open slope. The first shot cracked. The bullet snapped past his ear with a sound like a wet whip. They were on horses. He could hear them crashing through the pines below, cutting him off. He saw them, 2 riders, fanned out, pushing him up the mountain, toward the rocks, and one, farther back, staying low. Fletcher. Jesse changed direction, diving into a stand of thick, old-growth pine. The branches were heavy with snow, and he pushed through them, the snow dumping on him, covering his tracks for a precious few seconds. He had to get where the horses could not. He scrambled up a rockfall, a steep chimney of granite and ice. He pulled himself up, his good arm burning, his wounded arm screaming in protest. He heard the horses stop below. They were dismounting. "He's going for the pass," a voice yelled. "Cut him off! Jed!" Fletcher's voice. "I'll go up the gut." Jesse reached the top of the rockfall, his chest heaving. He was in a narrow defile, a cut in the stone. He ran, stumbling, his boots slipping on the ice. A man appeared at the far end, the one called Jed. He was fast. He was blocking the pass. He raised his rifle. Jesse did not stop. He fired from the hip. The rifle bucked in his hand. The shot was wild, chipping stone a foot from the man's head, but it made him duck. Jesse used the second. He dove behind a high boulder, the size of a wagon. He was trapped. Jed was at one end, and he could hear Fletcher climbing the rocks behind him. He was in a box. He peeked around the rock. Jed fired. The bullet sang off the granite. Jesse waited. He controlled his breathing. He had 1, maybe 2, chances. He heard the scrape of a boot on stone. Behind him. "Fletcher! Got you, outlaw!" Fletcher's voice rasped. He was close. Jesse stood, turned, and fired. All in one motion. Not at Fletcher, but at the man in the pass. Jed. Jed was the immediate threat. The rifle boomed. Jed staggered, clutching his chest, a look of pure surprise on his face. He fell forward into the snow, and did not move. Jesse turned back, raising his rifle. Fletcher was there. He fired. The bullet did not hit Jesse. It hit the rock face an inch from his head. The impact sent 1,000 tiny, hot needles into the left side of his face and neck. Shrapnel, a piece of lead, or a chip of granite, tore a hot, wet line down his ribs, on the same side as his other wound. He yelled, a sharp, involuntary sound of pain, and fell back, his rifle clattering on the ice. He was hit again. He was bleeding. Fletcher laughed, a low, cruel sound. He stepped into view, his shotgun raised. "Should have stayed in the chapel. Creel!" Jesse was on his back, his vision swimming with blood. He looked past Fletcher, at the edge of the defile. The ground just ended. 50 feet below, the canyon river, which had carved this pass, was a black, rushing ribbon, choked with ice flows. "Now, you tell me," Fletcher said, walking slowly toward him. "Where is the whore?" Jesse looked at Fletcher, at the shotgun, at the falling snow. He had one bullet left, but not for Fletcher. He put his good hand on the rock, and he pushed. He slid, on his back, toward the edge. "What?" Fletcher's face, for 1 second, was pure confusion. Jesse slid off the cliff. He did not yell. He fell, turning, into the empty, cold air. The last thing he saw was Fletcher's disbelieving face looking down. Then the black water hit him. It was not water. It was a solid, liquid wall of ice. The cold was a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs, stopping his heart. The current grabbed him, a powerful, dark hand, and pulled him under. He was dragged, tumbling, his body scraping against the rocks on the bottom. His lungs were on fire. He was dying. He fought, a last, primal instinct. He kicked, pushing up, his good arm clawing. He broke the surface. He gasped, a long, shuddering, freezing breath. Ice was all around him. He was in a chute of fast water. A shot rang out from above. Fletcher, firing into the river. Jesse let go. He did not fight the current. He let it take him, pulling him under the ice ledges, into the shadow of the canyon, away from the gunfire, into the freezing, dark oblivion. In the cabin, Miriam waited. The silence was a physical thing. She had heard the shots. First, the crackle of a firefight. Then one, single, final shot. Then, nothing. The silence stretched for an hour. Then 2. "Mama," Thomas whispered, his voice tiny in the cold room. "I'm hungry." "I know, baby. Soon." She did not know if Jesse was alive or dead. She only knew he had not returned. She prepared. She took the last of the blankets, their bedding, and tied it into a roll with the rope. She packed the tin pot and the last of the flour. She was ready to run, but she waited. The image of Jesse's face, the hard kiss, the command, "Bar the door." She sat on the floor, the revolver in her lap, her back to the wall, facing the door. Thomas was beside her, wrapped in her shawl. She thought about what would happen if the door opened. And it was not Jesse. She remembered the man at the chapel, Fletcher. She thought about Silas Danner. She looked at the fireplace, at the loose rock she had seen Jesse idly poke at. She pulled the piece of charcoal from the cold ashes. On the smoothest piece of bark she had, she began to write. She wrote her name. She wrote her son's name. She wrote about Daniel and the drifter, and the lie of her marriage. She wrote Silas Danner's name over and over. "He is a murderer. He is a monster." She wrote about Judge March in Laramie. She shoved the piece of bark into the crack, behind the loose stone, a message in a bottle, a last, desperate prayer. The afternoon light was fading when the knock came. It was not a fist. It was a polite, rapping sound. Miriam's heart leapt into her throat. She snatched Thomas, pulling him behind her, her hand clamping over his mouth. She raised the revolver, two-handed, aiming it at the center of the door. "Hello?" a voice called. It was not Fletcher. It was a smooth, educated voice. "Hello, the cabin. I'm a traveler, a man of God. I am lost, and my horse is lame. I beg you, in this weather, shelter in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ." "A preacher?" Miriam's arm wavered. "A man of God, lost." Go away." Her voice was a squeak. We have sickness, the fever, it's not safe." A warm, sympathetic chuckle. "Oh, my child, that is when the Lord's comfort is needed most. I have quinine in my bag. I have ministered to the sick in this territory for 10 years. Please, daughter, open the door. Let me offer a prayer." He sounded so kind, so safe. She crept to the wall, to the tiny, ice-choked crack by the door frame. She squinted. She saw him, a man in a long black coat, a round, black hat. He was sitting on a fine, strong, black horse, a horse with a brand on its flank, a double D. The blood drained from her face. It was a lie, a trick. "I said go away!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, raw with terror and rage. "We don't want your prayers. We don't want your help." The man was silent. The kind, warm mask was gone. When he spoke again, his voice was as cold as the ice on the river. "Miriam, Mrs. Danner, your husband is a forgiving man. He's worried about you. He just wants his family home." He paused. "He just wants his son. Open the door. It will be so much easier." "No. Mr. Fletcher is dealing with your friend on the mountain. He will be back soon. You can come with me, warm, on my horse, or you can wait for Mr. Fletcher. He is less gentle." "I will shoot you!" Miriam yelled, pressing her back against the wall, the gun aimed at the door. "I will kill you. You tell Silas Danner he will never put his hands on my son again. You tell him I'll see him in hell." There was a long, heavy silence. "A pity." The preacher's voice sighed. He sounded bored. "We will wait. The cold, it's a terrible thing. It gets in the bones. It makes a woman reasonable." She heard his horse step back. He was not leaving. He was watching. Night fell. The cabin was a block of ice. They had no fire. They had not eaten. Miriam and Thomas were huddled under the one blanket she had not packed. Shivering, every sound made her jump. Every pop of the cooling cabin wood was a footstep. Then she heard it, a sound at the door. Not a knock, not a boot, a wet, sliding, scraping sound. A body. She aimed the gun. "Who is it?" "Miriam." It was a ghost's voice, a single, exhaled word, thick with blood. She tore the bar away. The door swung open. He did not walk in. He fell. He was a heap of frozen cloth and blood, collapsing onto the floor. "Jesse." He was blue. His face was the color of a winter twilight. His clothes were a solid, frozen mass stuck to his skin. He was covered in ice, his hair matted with it, and he was bleeding. The new wound in his side, the shrapnel tear, was a long, dark, frozen gash. He was shivering, a deep, convulsive, violent shaking that seemed to rattle his bones. "The river," he gasped, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form words. "So cold." "Thomas, the bag! Get the bag!" She slammed the door, barred it. The preacher was out there, but he did not matter. She dragged Jesse toward the hearth. "The knife," he whispered. "In my boot." She got his knife. "My clothes. Cut them. Can't feel." She saved his life for the second time. She cut the frozen coat, the frozen shirt, the frozen pants from his body. They came off in stiff, icy chunks. His skin was pale, mottled, and freezing to the touch. The wound in his side was ugly, a ragged, blue-lipped tear. She packed it with the last of their clean rags. She wrapped him in the blankets from the bag, all of them. "The fire. Miriam." He shivered. Have to get warm. He's out there. He'll see the smoke. He knows. Just light it. Small." She lit the fire. She piled the last of their wood on it. She melted snow in the pot and forced the hot water between his chattering teeth. He was still shaking, a deep, racking shudder. Thomas, his face white, crept over. Is he? Huddle. Close. Jesse gasped. Your warmth, boy. Need it. Thomas lay down, pressing his small, warm body against Jesse's back. They sat like that for hours. Jesse, Miriam, and Thomas. A tiny, broken family, huddled around a fire while a killer waited in the dark. He woke near midnight. The shaking had stopped. A burning, dry fever had replaced the cold. Miriam was sitting beside him, the gun in her lap, watching him. He's still out there, she whispered. I know. His voice was a dry rasp. Fletcher is dead. I killed him. Not Fletcher, she said, and told him about the preacher. He listened, his eyes closing. Danner's men, all of them. He looked at her, his gaze fever-bright. You're safe, for now. She broke. The tears she had held back, the terror, the grief, it all came loose. No, Jesse, she wept, the tears dripping onto his blanket. We are not safe. You are dying. For me, this is my fault. She grabbed his good hand. Let me go, please. In the morning, I'll walk out. I'll turn myself in. I'll tell him I don't know where Thomas is. I'll trade myself. I can't watch him kill you. He tried to sit up, a groan of pure agony escaping him. He fell back, but his hand gripped hers, his fingers surprisingly strong, biting into her skin. No, he hissed. The word was full of gravel and iron. You don't go back. You don't ever go back. But we'll all die, she sobbed. Better to die, he whispered. Better than he coughed, a terrible, wet sound. We won't die. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the fire. He was looking at the pallets, the empty one where she had slept, the one he was on, the place where they had the bedding. He whispered, his voice strange. What? The bedding. Where we lay. He was delirious. She thought, Jesse, rest. No. He pushed himself up on one elbow. The scent, the preacher, he's waiting. He'll bring dogs. They'll smell us. He pointed to the pallet they had shared. It smells of us, of you. Burn it. What? Jesse, no. It's all we have to sleep on. Burn it, he commanded, his voice suddenly strong. We have to kill the scent, kill the trail, erase it. He was thinking like a hunted animal. He was burning the nest. He shoved the empty straw tick with his boot, toward the fire. Help me. Shaking, she did as he asked. She took the pallet, the one that smelled of her, of him, of their desperate, shared life, and she fed it to the fire. It smoked, then flared, a bright, hot, angry fire, filling the cabin with a suffocating, acrid smoke. Jesse fell back, panting, the fever high in his eyes. He reached for her, pulling her close. He was burning hot, his hand like a brand on her arm. He pulled her down, his lips by her ear, his voice a low, fierce whisper that was more powerful than any shout. You and the boy. He breathed, his hand tangled in her hair. You're my reason, my reason to live. You understand? I'm not running, not anymore. She held him, her heart breaking, her will hardening. She believed him. The morning came, cold and gray. Jesse was weak. His side was a landscape of raw pain, but the fever had cooled. The fire was ashes. The cabin was bare. He's still out there, Miriam said. She had checked. The black horse was still visible, a statue of death by the tree line. We go, tonight, Jesse said. He was sitting up, his back to the wall. East, Miriam said, gathering the bag. To Wyoming, to the judge. We'll steal a horse. Yes, Jesse said. He nodded. We go to Wyoming. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes of a man who had been baptized in ice and fire. "But we have to make a stop first." "A stop?" she said, her hands freezing on the bag. "Where? The trading post?" Jesse shook his head. "No. We're going to stop at Silas Danner's ranch." Miriam stared at him. Jesse, that's suicide. That's the one place we'll be riding into the trap." "It's the only place," Jesse said, his voice quiet, deadly. "You were right, Miriam. We can't keep running. A man like Danner, he's a sickness. He doesn't stop. You can't run from a plague." "Then what do we do?" she whispered, her fear a cold knot. Jesse looked at her, his scarred face grim, his eyes holding a new, terrible clarity. "You don't run from a fire like that," he said. "You put it out." The journey to the Double D Ranch was a 2-night descent into hell. They stole the preacher's horse, a fine, strong animal that carried Miriam and Thomas, while Jesse walked, his hand on the saddle, his body a ruin held together by spite and a new, terrible purpose. He was bleeding. The river had left ice in his bones, and the shrapnel wounds in his side and face had turned hot. A fever was coiling in his gut, a snake of fire that made the world shimmer at the edges. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They had left the preacher to freeze, a just and cold tribunal, and now they moved through the snow-blasted passes like ghosts, driven by a force darker than the wind. On the third night, they saw it. The ranch was a scar of light and shadow in the valley below. It was not a homestead. It was a fortress. A long, low main house built of thick, dark timber sat on a rise, flanked by a massive barn. A dozen outbuildings and a web of corrals. Lights burned in the windows of the main house and the bunkhouse. It was alive, a spider at the center of a web. They left the horse and Thomas a mile back, in a deep, sheltered copse of aspens. "Mama," Thomas whispered, his voice thin, clinging to her coat. Miriam knelt, her face a pale, hard mask in the moonlight. "You will stay here. Thomas, you will be a shadow. You will not move. You will not make a sound. You are the quietest boy in the world. Do you understand me?" He nodded, his eyes huge. "We will come back for you. You promise?" Miriam looked at Jesse. He was leaning against a tree, his breath pluming in short, pained clouds. He was saving all his strength for the end. "I promise," she said. She left her son, a small, dark bundle in the snow, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. They moved down the slope, two shadows in a world of white. Jesse moved with the pained, deliberate shuffle of a man near his end, but his eyes were sharp. They scanned the layout, the guards, the lines of sight. "The barn," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He pointed. "It's full of hay. It's the only way. I need to pull them. I need to pull them all." "Them?" Miriam looked. 2 men stood on the wide veranda of the main house, smoking, their rifles leaning against the wall. Another light was on in the bunkhouse. "I need a distraction," Jesse said. "A big one." He had a plan. He always had a plan. He had taken the last of the oil from a lantern on the preacher's saddle. He had a small flask of it. "You wait here," he said, handing her his rifle. "When you hear the shouts, when they run to the barn, the front door will be clear." "What good is the rifle?" she said, her voice shaking. "I'll go with you." "No, this part is my trade." He unholstered his Colt, checked it. The weight seemed to steady him. "When they run, you stay. You are the lookout." "Jesse, stay," he commanded. He moved, a broken, lurching shadow, keeping to the dark side of the corrals. Miriam watched, her heart hammering, the heavy rifle cold in her hands. She watched him disappear into the blackness of the barn shadow. He was gone for 5 minutes, 10, an eternity. She saw him again, a flicker of movement near the main house, tucking himself into the deep shadows of the veranda, just yards from the 2 guards. He was waiting. Then a new light bloomed, a small, orange glow from the side of the barn. It was not fast. It was a slow, creeping thing. One of the guards on the porch laughed, a loud, barking sound, Did you hear that? Sykes is back. Won himself $50 in—" He stopped. His head turned. "What's that smell? You smell that?" "Smoke," the other one said, suddenly alert. Hell, it's the barn." A yell. "Fire! Fire in the barn! Get the buckets!" The two men leaped from the porch, their rifles forgotten. They ran, shouting, toward the barn. A second later, the bunkhouse door burst open, and 3 more men, pulling on coats, ran out, all of them heading for the rising glow. The fire, set in the dry hay, was catching now. A whoosh of orange flame licking up the side of the building. The ranch was in chaos. Jesse moved. He did not go in the front door. He used the distraction, but he was too smart for the obvious path. He broke a window on the side, a dark room, and slipped inside. Miriam did not stay. The moment he was inside, she moved. She ran from the trees, keeping low, the rifle in one hand, the revolver Jesse had given her revolver, tucked in her waistband. She did not know what she was going to do. She only knew she would not leave him to fight alone. She followed him, slipping through the same broken window, into the opulent, terrifying darkness of her enemy's home. The house smelled of cigar smoke, old whiskey, and beeswax. It was a rich man's house, heavy with dark, carved wood and thick carpets that muffled her steps. She heard a sound. Jesse, grunting, and followed. She found him in a room that was all leather and books, a study. Jesse was standing in the center of the room, his coat raised, his arm shaking. But his aim true, Silas Danner was sitting behind a massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was not a monster in horns. He was a man, handsome in a cold, hard way, with graying temples and eyes as flat and gray as a winter sky. He was wearing a silk smoking jacket. He looked annoyed. "So," Silas said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. "Fletcher failed, and the preacher, it seems I am paying for incompetence. And you look half dead. Son, get some paper," Jesse rasped, breathing hard. The wound in his side was weeping, a dark stain on his torn shirt, and a pen. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Is this a robbery? You're doing a poor job. The safe is behind you." "This ain't a robbery." Jesse took a staggering step forward. "You're going to write a confession. You're going to write that the marriage to Miriam Graves was a fraud. You're going to write that you coerced her. And you're going to write that Thomas Graves is the sole, legal heir of Daniel Graves." Silas stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp, disbelieving sound. "A confession? Boy, who do you think you are?" He leaned forward, setting his whiskey down. "Let's say you, a wounded, wanted outlaw, managed to kill me. What then? You'll be hung by morning. Or let's say you take this piece of paper. You ride to Laramie, to the law." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Miriam had ever seen. "I am the law here. Sheriff Rollins is my man. The judges are my friends. And you? Who are you? You're a killer." He gestured at Jesse's ragged form. "And her, who will the law believe? A respected landowner? Or the word of a runaway whore who shacked up with an outlaw?" Jesse's gun did not waver. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "They won't believe her. And they won't believe me." He coughed, a dry, racking sound. "But they'll believe Arthur Shaw." The name hit Silas like a physical blow. The smile vanished. The color drained from his face. "Who?" "The drifter." Jesse spat. "The man you murdered in her kitchen. You thought he was just a bum. He wasn't. He was a surveyor. He was working for the Union Pacific. He was mapping your land. Danner, he knew. All of it was fraudulent. He had a ledger. He kept notes. He knew you'd killed the men who came before him. And he was smart. He hid his work." "That's a lie," Silas said, but his voice was tight. "Is it?" Jesse said. "He told Miriam, right before you shot him. He told her he hid his ledger, his maps, everything, under the floorboards of the smokehouse. He said, if he didn't make it back to St. Louis, his brother, a man high up in the railroad, would come looking for it. He said he'd sent a letter. It was a bluff. A beautiful, desperate, perfect bluff. Jesse had no idea if any of it was true, except the man's name, the one Miriam had wept in the night. But Silas Danner believed it. The standoff was absolute. The outlaw, bleeding to death, and the landowner. His entire empire balanced on a knife's edge. From outside, the shouts grew louder. The fire was roaring. Silas. The voice was not Jesse's. Miriam stepped out of the shadow of the doorway. She was holding the rifle, though it was pointed at the floor. It was her other hand, holding her revolver. That was steady. Silas Danner saw her, and his face, which had been pale with fear, flooded with a dark, possessive rage. "You!" he hissed. "You ungrateful bitch! After all, Be quiet," Miriam said. Her voice was not a whisper. It was not a scream. It was a cold, flat, dead thing. It was the voice of a woman who had burned away all her fear. "Jesse," she said, not looking at him. "Keep your gun on his head." She walked forward, stopping on the other side of the desk, so that she and Silas were face to face. "You are a murderer," she said, her voice clear in the ringing silence. "Your man, Fletcher. He tried to kill us. Your other man, the one who pretends to be a preacher. He tried to trick us. You killed Arthur Shaw. You shot him in my house, on my floor." He was a vagrant. Silas spat. "He was a man," Miriam said. "You killed the surveyors last spring, the ones they said were lost in the blizzard." Arthur knew. "You threatened my son. You used Sheriff Rollins to steal my land, to steal my name. You tried to erase my boy." She raised the revolver, her hand perfectly steady. She was not aiming at his head. She was aiming at his heart. You wouldn't," Silas said, his eyes wide. He was looking at her, really looking at her. For the first time, he was not seeing a possession. He was seeing an executioner. "No," she said. "I won't kill you. That's your way." Silas saw his opening. She was weak. She was just a woman. His eyes flickered to Jesse, who was swaying, his gun arm trembling with exhaustion. He moved. He was fast. He was not going for a gun. He was lunging, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of pure, primal rage. He was lunging at her, to throttle her, to silence her. The shot was deafening. It was not Miriam's gun. Jesse fired. The bullet took Silas in the thigh, high up. It was not a killing shot, it was a crippling one. Silas Danner screamed, a high, thin sound that was nothing like his baritone laugh. He collapsed, clutching his leg, a dark, pulsing stain of blood already spreading over the fine wool of his trousers, onto the expensive carpet. The room was full of smoke, of the smell of sulfur and blood. "The paper," Jesse gasped, leaning heavily on the desk. "Write it, now." "My leg. I'm shot," Silas wailed. "A child in a man's suit." Jesse cocked the hammer again. The click was the loudest sound in the world. "The paper, or the next one, is for your lying mouth." Sobbing, cursing, Silas Danner dragged himself up. He fumbled for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly, he could barely write. He scribbled, blood from his hand mixing with the ink. "I, Silas Danner, confess the marriage to Miriam Graves was a fraud. Thomas Graves is the legal son. He signed it. He wrote a separate paper, the one Jesse demanded, the one nullifying the marriage." He threw the pen down. "There. Take it, and go to hell." Miriam walked over. She did not look at his wound. She looked at his face. She took the papers from the desk. His blood was smeared across the confession. "You don't own me anymore," she said. Shouts from the hallway. "In here! The shot was in here!" The door burst open. It was the two guards from the porch, their faces smudged with soot. They saw Jesse, saw Danner on the floor, saw Miriam. They raised their rifles. Jesse did not hesitate. He fired, his last bullet, at the crystal lantern hanging from the ceiling. It exploded. The room was plunged into total darkness. save for the wild, red glow of the barn fire raging outside the windows. "Miriam, go! The back!" He shoved her. He grabbed her hand. They ran, stumbling through the dark, opulent house. They burst out the back door into a yard of pure chaos. The barn was a pillar of fire, reaching for the sky. Men were shouting. Horses were screaming. The fire, fanned by the wind, was already licking at the roof of the bunkhouse. Jesse's distraction had worked. It had worked too well. It was consuming the entire ranch. "The horses!" Jesse yelled. They ran to the main corral. They were all empty, except for two, saddled, tied to the rail by the main house. The guards' horses. They were on them in a second. Jesse, pulling himself into the saddle with a groan that was half death. "Miriam, light and fast, mounting up. Go!" he yelled. They spurred the horses, crashing through the ranch yard, past the running, shouting men who were too busy fighting the fire to see the two riders. A man and a woman, fleeing into the night, swallowed by the smoke. They rode for hours. They rode until the horses were lathered, until the red glow of the burning ranch was just a memory. Jesse was slumped in his saddle, holding the pommel with both hands, his body kept upright by will alone. At dawn, they stopped in a shallow, frozen creek bed. Miriam slid from her horse and helped Jesse down. He collapsed onto the snowy bank, his breathing ragged. She tended to his wounds, the one in his leg, from the lunge, the one in his side, from the shrapnel. They were both bleeding sluggishly. He was burning with fever. She built a small, careful fire, hidden by the rocks. She took the papers from her coat. One was the confession, stained with Silas Danner's blood. This was for Judge March. This was their future. The other was the fraudulent marriage certificate, the paper that had bound her, that had named her a possession. She looked at it, at her name, signed in a shaking hand, at his, bold and proprietary. She held it over the tiny, struggling flame. It curled, turned brown at the edges, and then, with a small whoosh, it caught. She watched the ink turn to black ash. She watched her old life, her shame, her prison, dissolve into smoke. Jesse was watching her, his eyes half open, fever bright in the gray morning light. She dropped the last, burning corner into the snow. It hissed and was gone. "Now," Miriam whispered, looking not at Jesse, but at the rising sun, at the clean, white, endless snow of Wyoming ahead of them. "Now it's just us." They journeyed eastward. The world had been scoured clean by the wind, leaving only ice-slicked rock and the skeletal frames of winter-killed pines. The two horses, stolen from Dana's ranch, were strong, but the terrain was a killer. Jesse rode slumped, his body a fire of infection. The river, the shrapnel, the final, desperate fight. It had all come due. The fever, which he had held at bay with pure will, now consumed him. He was a dead man, riding on a horse he did not own, next to a woman who had, for some reason, tied her life to his. Miriam was the one who was strong. The terror that had hollowed her out for months was gone, burned away in the fire of Danner's ranch. She was left with a cold, clear, unbreakable resolve. She had a son to save, and she had a man to save. On the second night, Jesse fell. He did not slide from the saddle. He simply collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut, landing in a heap in the snow. "Jesse!" He did not respond. He was breathing, his breath a shallow, steaming rattle in the freezing air. His skin was burning. She could not lift him. She and Thomas, using all their strength, dragged him from the trail into a shallow, rocky overhang. It was not enough. The wind was a blade. "We need shelter," Miriam whispered, not to him, but to the uncaring, dark sky. She left him, wrapped in their only blankets, his breath already slowing. She took the revolver and walked. She told Thomas to stay, to lie on top of Jesse, to give him his warmth. She found it a mile away, a dark, square shape tucked into a draw, a trapper's hut, half buried in a drift, abandoned for the winter. The door was off its hinges. It took her 2 hours. She went back. She got Thomas, and together, in the dark, They half dragged, half carried the dead weight of Jesse Creel through the snow to the hut. They laid him on the dirt floor by the small stone fireplace. For 3 days, he did not wake. He was in the fire, floating in a red, painful haze. He spoke, but not to her. He called for Eli, his lost brother. He argued with a man named Sykes. He mumbled about a bank in Three Forks. Miriam did not sleep. She hunted. She took the horses out, using Jesse's rifle, and shot a small, scrawny deer that had been sheltering in the pines. She brought the meat back, made a hot, thin broth, and forced it, drop by drop, between his cracked lips. She cleaned his wounds. The hole in his leg was angry and red. The shrapnel tears in his side were worse, weeping fluid, smelling of sickness. She had no whiskey. She used the only thing she had. She packed the wounds with snow, over and over, freezing the infection, until her own hands were numb and blue. She boiled water and tore up her own petticoat for clean bandages. Thomas was her shadow. He was no longer the silent ghost of the chapel. He was a boy with a purpose. He fetched the snow. He kept the fire. He sat and watched Jesse, his small face a mask of worry. On the 4th morning, Jesse's fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear, but his body weak as a newborn's. The first thing he saw was Miriam, asleep, sitting upright against the wall, her head fallen on her chest, the revolver in her lap. The second thing he saw was Thomas. The boy was sitting by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with Jesse's own knife, the one he had used to carve the bird. Jesse tried to sit up. A groan, low and pained, escaped him. Thomas's head snapped up. He did not look scared. He looked relieved. He dropped the knife and scrambled over. "Mama, wake up!" the boy yelled. "Pa's awake!" "Pa's awake!" Miriam was awake in an instant, her hand flying to the gun. She saw Jesse, his eyes open, and she saw Thomas, his small hand on Jesse's good arm. She froze. The word hung in the tiny, smoky cabin. "Pa!" Jesse looked at the boy. His throat was dry, his body a map of pain. He looked at the child, at his bright, worried eyes. He looked at Miriam, at her pale, exhausted, beautiful face. He could have said, "I'm not your pa, kid." He could have corrected him. Instead, he lifted his good hand, his fingers shaking, and put it on Thomas's head. "Hey, son," Jesse rasped. He did not correct him. They stayed in the hut for 2 more weeks. Strength returned to Jesse. Slowly, the meat from the deer, the warmth of the fire, the relentless, steady care from Miriam. It all worked a slow magic. The wounds closed, the fever receded, leaving him gaunt, scarred, but alive. He carved more animals for Thomas. He showed him how to set a snare. Miriam watched them, and a peace she had never known. Not even with Daniel, settled in her, she had a family, a strange, broken, fugitive family. But the fear was not gone. It was just resting. One night, she woke from a nightmare. She was not in the hut. She was back in Danner's study, but this time, Jesse did not fire. Silas was choking her, his gray eyes flat and dead. She sat up, gasping, her heart a cold bird in her chest. She slipped out of the hut, into the blue-white light of the full moon. The snow was deep, the silence vast. She was so far from Laramie, so far from the law, so far from anything. The confession in her pocket felt like a lie. The fire felt like a dream. What if Danner had not died? What if he had men right now, riding through this snow? What if they had only bought themselves a week? They were afoot. They were wounded. They were helpless. There's no safe place. She had whispered it in the prospector's cabin, and she believed it now. She sank to her knees in the snow, her body shaking, and she wept. She cried for the running, for the fear that it would never, ever end. The hut door creaked. Jesse was standing there. He was wearing his coat, but he was still weak. He walked to her, his steps unsteady in the deep snow. He did not touch her. He just stood beside her, a gaunt shadow in the moonlight. "He's not coming. Miriam, how do you know?" she sobbed. looking up at him. "How do you know? Men like him, they don't just stop. They're like the wind. They're everywhere. We'll get to Wyoming and they'll be waiting. They'll laugh at us. They'll take Thomas." He knelt in the snow beside her. He was clumsy. He was not a man built for comfort. "I don't know," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't know if they'll be there. I don't know if we'll ever be safe." He reached inside his shirt, fumbling with a leather cord around his neck. He pulled it off. On the end of it was a small, simple, silver locket. It was tarnished, worn smooth by years of touch. This was my mother's," he said, his voice rough. She gave it to me the day I left home, before Eli, before all of it." He pressed it into her cold hand. "She said, 'The world is hard. Jesse, it'll try to make you alone. Don't let it. This was all I had of a good life." He closed her fingers around it. I can't promise that men won't come," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I can't promise that the law won't try to take me. I can't promise you a safe place." He took her other hand, the one not holding the locket. "But I can promise you this. Wherever you go, whatever happens, you're not alone." She looked at the locket. She looked at his scarred, earnest face, illuminated by the moon. She threw her arms around his neck, and she held on, her face buried in his coat, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was trying to blow her away. They reached Laramie, Wyoming. In the first week of March, the snow was melting, turning the streets to a thick brown soup of mud and ice. The town was loud, full of miners, ranchers, and railroad men. They were a sight, a gaunt, scarred man with a limp, a pale, thin woman in a torn dress, and a small, wide-eyed boy. They had sold one horse for food, and the other for a single night in a clean boarding house. Jesse was wanted. Walking into this town was the single greatest risk he had ever taken. Judge Abram March had his chambers above the land registry office. Jesse stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "You go," he said to Miriam. "You and Thomas, give him the confession. Tell him your story. He knew my father. He'll listen." "What about you?" she asked, her hand tightening on his. I'll wait. If he listens, I'll find work. If he doesn't..." "No," Miriam said. She pulled him toward the stairs. We go. You're not alone. Remember?" Judge March was a bear of a man, with a great white beard, a face like a carved mountain, and eyes that had seen everything. He was chewing on an unlit cigar. "The court's not in session," he growled, not looking up from his paperwork. "Come back Thursday." "Sir," Miriam said. We need your help. My name is Miriam Graves." "Graves, don't know you. I am the widow of Daniel Graves, and I have evidence concerning Silas Danner." The judge's head snapped up, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, bored into her. He looked at her, at the boy, and finally, at the scarred man standing behind her. "Creel," the judge said, his voice a low rumble. "Jesse Creel. By God, I've got a stack of papers, a foot high, on you. Warrant from Three Forks, bank robbery, murder of a deputy." It was self-defense. "Judge," Jesse said, his voice quiet. "They all say that." March grunted. He leaned back in his chair. "And what in God's green earth does Silas Danner have to do with the son of my old friend, Elias Creel?" "He has to do with me," Miriam said. She stepped forward, and she told him. She told him everything. The fake marriage, the threat to her son, the murder of Arthur Shaw, the chapel, the hunt, the fire. The judge listened. He did not interrupt. His face was stone. When she was finished, her voice was a dry whisper. The room was silent. "A story," the judge said, at last. A terrible story, but a story." Silas Danner owns the law in his territory. I have no jurisdiction." "We have this," Miriam said. She took the confession from her pocket. The paper was stiff, stained with blood. She laid it on the desk. Judge March picked it up. He looked at the frantic, pain-filled scrawl. He looked at the signature. He looked at the dark, rust-colored smear. "Is this his blood?" Jesse said. "And his signature, signed in his study. The night we left." The judge stared at the paper. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. "Silas Danner," he rumbled. "That arrogant, puffed-up son of a... He'd burn the world to keep it, and you took it from him." He looked at Jesse. "That bluff about Arthur Shaw and the railroad? That was good, very good." "It wasn't a bluff," Miriam said. The judge looked at her. "Arthur, he told me." She whispered. "He said if he died, his brother, at the Union Pacific, would come." The judge's smile vanished, replaced by a look of awe. "Then it's true." He stood. He walked to the window. "Silas Danner is finished. The railroad has been trying to break his land monopoly for 5 years. This confession, this testimony, it's the bullet they've been waiting for." He turned. "I will have protections arranged, full, legal, binding. The court will recognize your son's legitimacy. Your land, your husband's land, will be restored." He looked at Jesse. "And you? What am I to do with you? Jesse Creel?" I'll take what's coming." Jesse said, I need to know they're safe." The judge held his gaze. "The deputy in Three Forks. A shame. But the paperwork. It's a long way from there to Laramie. Sometimes things get lost, especially when a favor is owed." He picked up the confession. "I'm confiscating this, and you, Creel, you are invisible. You find a quiet piece of land, you build a house, and you do not ever come into my town wearing that gun." "Yes, sir," Jesse said. "Now get out of my office." The judge growled. "All of you. You're letting the cold in." The new life was not easy. It was hard. They did not go back to Miriam's old claim. The ghosts were too thick. With the money from the sale of her restored land, they bought a small, forgotten parcel, 10 miles outside Laramie. It was just grass, wind, and a creek. Jesse worked. He did not work odd jobs. He built, he cut sod, he felled trees, and with one good arm and one that was stiff and scarred, he built a house. It was not a cabin or a hut or a chapel. It was a home. It had 2 rooms and a real glass window. Miriam opened a sewing shop in their front room by the window. She put up a small, neat, hand-painted sign, "Miriam Graves, seamstress, dresses mending." She did not take his name. She took back her own. The women of Laramie, at first, were suspicious. They whispered, a widow, with a child, living with a scarred, quiet man. But her work was good. Her stitches were clean. And she was kind. She was quiet. But she was kind. The whispers stopped. One day, the wife of the town banker, a woman who had never known a day of hardship, came in. She looked at Miriam, at Thomas reading by the fire, at Jesse, who was outside, mending a fence. It's a hard life, isn't it?" the banker's wife said, a small, pitying smile on her face. Miriam was measuring a piece of blue calico. She stopped. She looked up, her pale blue eyes clear and steady. "It's a good life," Miriam said. "And it's mine." Spring came. The valley turned a high, bright, impossible green. They hosted a gathering. It was not a party. It was a thank you to the neighbors who had helped Jesse raise the roof, to the judge, who came and ate a full plate of deer stew. Thomas was no longer a shadow. He was 6 years old, loud and fast. He played with the other ranchers' children. a wild, laughing game of tag in the new grass. Miriam was by the food, serving, talking. She was wearing a simple, clean dress, the color of a summer sky. No veil, no shadows. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a sound that was full and free. Jesse watched her. He was standing by the corral, his hands in his pockets. He was not a builder. He was not a rancher. He did not know what he was. But he was here. She saw him. She smiled. She left her guests and walked to him, across the field. The sun was low, turning the grass to a sea of gold. She stopped in front of him. "You're not talking, Jesse Creel." "Just listening," he said, his voice rough. He looked at the house, at the boy, at her. It's good," he said. "Yes," she said. She put her hand on his chest, on his heart. "It is." He kissed her, in the golden field, in front of the judge, in front of the neighbors. He kissed her, a long, slow, quiet kiss that tasted of sunshine and wood smoke, and a life he never, ever thought he would have. He pulled back, his scarred hand on her cheek. "I walked into your life," he whispered, his voice thick. "Without knowing, I was just a wounded man in a chapel." She put her hand over his. "But I won't ever walk out." That night, the guests were gone. The dishes were clean, the air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. They sat by the fire, in the small house they had built. Miriam was in her chair, mending a rip in Thomas's shirt. Thomas was asleep on a pallet by the hearth, his face relaxed, free of dreams. And Jesse Creel, the outlaw, the killer, the fugitive, sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out. He was cleaning his rifle. He was safe. They were all safe. It was not a safety that had been given. It was not an escape. It was a peace that they had built. One piece of wood, one stitch, one promise at a time. They were not safe because they had escaped the past, but because they had fought, together, for something new. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope you enjoyed this tale. Where in the world are you listening from? We would love to know. Please drop a comment and share your thoughts with us. And if you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories from the American frontier.